Welcome, everybody. My name's Aaron Masliansky, and I am here to help with the JCC Jewish Film Festival. And we are talking about the film, The Seven Boxes. And it is a terrific documentary. It's about this woman, Dory Sondheimer, and she has an amazing story where she lived in Spain. And you probably have seen the film by now. She lived in Spain and didn't really know her past. And after her parents had passed away, she opened up these boxes that had truly treasures of information. And she learned that she had such a rich family, that many of whom passed away in the Holocaust. But she was able to connect with other family members that she didn't even know existed. And it's the story of her learning about her family, meeting these other family members, bringing them together in Barcelona, and how they kind of recreate these lives that were lost by connecting to their current families. It's truly remarkable. And I am really honored to be joined today with Joshua Taylor, who is the president of the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society. He is a nationally recognized genealogical author and researcher who lectures across the globe. He is the host of the popular PBS series, Genealogy Roadshow, which is a lot of fun to watch, really interesting, and was the previous president of the Federation of Genealogical Societies. So Joshua, thank you so much for joining me today so we can discuss this great film and learn about it.
Well, absolutely, Aaron. I'm honored to be invited and always happy to be part of events like this.
Well, it's great to have you here. And, I'm going to get to this, and you've spoken to many people and learning about their family histories. How typical is a story like Dory's?
The amazing thing is, when I first started doing family history, I would have said it was not typical. And the more and more that I encounter families, it is more typical than you would think. Dory's story of a discovery that led to worldwide connections is unique to her, but not unique to the larger picture of those stories. And so, there are secrets and there are things that hide in a lot of families, and there are simply stories that haven't been told.
Yeah. Now, you say it's not surprising because you've seen so many different people's histories. I mean, how did you get interested in this?
So I started with my grandmother. She was an avid genealogist, and I sort of inherited the gene, so to speak, in researching. And then I very quickly discovered that I loved helping other people with their own family history. So it was far more beyond that personal journey. And I started helping others and realized that, everyone has a little bit of a story in their past that's there.
Yeah, no, everyone certainly does. And, this is a great story because she's able to tie and really connect. But how can people find the answers to their own family's histories before it's too late and, people pass away? And I know on your show, you can look through a lot of different documentation, but it's so much, I assume, easier to have the source documents, the people.
The people, I will say the number one piece of advice that I give everyone is grab your relatives, your oldest relatives, your youngest relatives, grab your relatives and start asking open-ended questions. The more questions that you can ask, things like, what's your earliest memory? What do you remember about school? Those are types of questions that can enter into conversations. And as you get those answers, that might lead you to further questions, but it all starts with really talking with those older relatives and asking them, anything you can think of about memories that they have. Who is the oldest relative who they remember, and what is something distinctive about them is a good opening question to sort of reach back across a couple of generations.
How far do you think you can go back with most people? How many generations? How many hundreds of years?
It really depends on the background of a family and the records that exist. There are families that can go back, centuries and centuries, back to the 1500s. There are some families that, you're very, very lucky if you can get back to the early 1800s, just based upon what records have survived and what were created. But it's a bit of a mix with individuals. But I always encourage people, start with yourself, your parents, your grandparents, and your great grandparents, and then begin working back on different generations from there.
What's the best way to keep it? Because, you look at a current situation of what's going on right now in Ukraine,
right?
And it's mind-boggling. And you have people fleeing, 2 million people leaving in the first 2 weeks of this war, and all they got is a suitcase with them.
Right.
How do you take those memories? And you think digital, but like, how long does that gonna last? What do you recommend?
This is a principle in digital management, right? Lots of copies keep stuff safe. And lots of digital copies are what you use to keep things safe. As you record memories, as you record photographs, take advantage of the cloud and share with as many people as you can. Reach out and donate materials if you can to museums and societies, so that there are lots of copies of the documents that you might need in the future, but your descendants might also need to help retell that story.
So Dory's story, she has donated those 7 boxes and all the information to the U.S. Holocaust Museum. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So if anybody wants to go and review her documents, can they? How does that work?
So typically they can. I'm not sure of the specific any limitations that might be placed upon that collection. But as a general rule, anyone who donates materials can give permission for other researchers to come visit the archive and look at the materials. And in the case of Dory's collection, her collection holds stories of others, and so it's so important that is open and available for research. But yeah, you can usually visit an archive or repository and begin looking through those materials.
It's so incredibly interesting. I mean, and do you, I know that you've done a lot in America, so the records are probably better than in some other places. Have you ever gone, or do you see people, putting together genealogical studies in different societies in, Southeast Asia, in, Africa, wherever throughout the world?
Absolutely. I've traveled and researched internationally. I've been in archives. To me, the situation right now in Ukraine, I think of the archival records that I've worked in, that I've researched in there. Yeah. There are, every culture, every society finds a way to document and to keep records. Sometimes it's kept amongst the oral tradition from one generation to the next. Sometimes it's kept in official government agencies and government repositories. But there are the amazing thing is there is a system of record keeping that essentially exists if you can get there and start to tap into it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting now. It's like you look at what's going on, and I've personally been asking my parents, where were we all from? Because I always knew my family was in Eastern Europe, and Ashkenazi Jew, and we're Russian, Polish, something like that. And now it's like, no, where are we from? And you start to realize, actually, a lot of my family was in Ukraine or in Belarus or in Poland. And it's these stories. That's why it's important, I think, to be able to connect with what's going on in current events with your own family history and tie that together.
It's true. I mean, we place the modern day map and the modern day borders on a territory where families collectively would never have identified it as that 150, 200 years ago.
Right.
And you look at it on the news and you go, oh, okay. And then you realize that, well, actually, if you strip away the political lines, you strip away what we put as modern borders there and names, that's where the history is. So it's important to ask questions. I mean, it's good to hear that you're asking the right questions, because that's how you find the information out.
How does doing like a DNA tests change what you're doing, and how can you get more information from doing those simple tests?
So, DNA testing is a fantastic avenue for family history research. A couple of things I always say before we suggest DNA testing. Understanding what you're actually testing is key. Making sure that you understand that your DNA is going to end up in a larger database. And if you're testing other relatives and cousins, you want to make sure they understand that. But what DNA is so critical for is it can help to show to people who have an ancestor in common within sort of 4 to 6 generations. the autosomal DNA testing. And so it's far more than the sort of ethnic breakdown on a pie chart of where your family comes from. It's actually showing connections between two individuals. And then it's up to the documents and the research to, of course, figure out where those connections line up and who the people were. But knowing scientifically that, a person that you meet shares an ancestor with you can really start and help embolden that journey.
So they can link up people who have both taken a test. Is that how it works?
Yes. Yeah. So if you both take a test and you're both sort of in the same database, it will help identify and say, oh, you probably have an ancestor in common, say 3 generations back or 4 generations back.
Do you ever see spouses taking the test and realizing that they're cousins?
Every once in a while, not that often, but quite often you'll see people who, individuals who've known each other for a long time, who test and realize that they share a 4th great grandparent somewhere along the way.
Yeah,
it happens.
It's a Pandora's box.
Yep.
So I think that part of it in this is great that you get to know about your shared experience, your shared history. Why do you think that knowing this, and we've had probably more education, more information than you ever have to be able to connect people to each other, why do we still have conflict with each other if we know that we're family?
That is a question I wish I could answer. The amazing thing is when you start looking at family history and genealogy, and you realize that the person whom you look at and just disagree with about a number of different things, you're third cousins, and you have a shared story. I wish I had the answer to that, because it is an absolute mystery to me how we can still be so conflicted and so divided, and yet have so much in common. And now we know about it.
Right. We know about it. And then you look at, like, especially in the Middle East, what do you know, like, in terms of how related are, people, maybe not Ashkenazi Jews, but people who have lived in, Yerushalmi Jews or Yemenite Jews, as compared to Palestinians, or, just people who've lived throughout that region for thousands of years?
Right. And I will say I don't do a lot of genetic genealogy from that end of things, but I will say, as a general rule, the longer a population has lived in the exact same place and hasn't moved, we call it the pedigree collapse, where basically you start to see, where third cousins married third cousins over generations, and the family tree does get quite twisted, and you find that the person living next to you is related to you, a couple times over. That absolutely occurs, particularly if you have a limited geographic region over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. Now, in regards to Dory's family, what have you stayed in? Have you been in touch with her and the family since the film has come out? And what are some of the things that have taken place since?
I haven't. I was invited to participate in the event at the Holocaust Museum as a genealogist, and had heard about the film. I had come across the film. I got to spend the evening with Dory and Michael, and others, sort of talking about what was available and the film. I haven't been able to remain in contact, but I have seen the story touch others. It's whenever someone asks me and they say, "Well, I'm curious about this," I say, "Here's a great film that you should watch, because this could be your story."
Yeah, they could be very similar. What is like some of the most surprising stories that you've uncovered, like through your show, and what's that experience been like?
I think one of the most interesting things is, the premise of Genealogy Roadshow is, send a question and we'll do the research and see what answer we can give you. And there was one story I remember very, very vividly in Philadelphia, where a woman was trying to essentially find out what happened to her family, most of whom had perished in the Holocaust, and she was trying to determine, how did my family get out? What was the story there? And so we did a whole bunch of research, and the researchers and the team found a lot of incredible things. And one of the things that was found is that not only did we figure out who helped her family escape, we also found out that those Americans would continue to support her and her family in the United States. They paid for the first car she had, which she never realized, because they were sort of distant figures, and she had no idea of the deep connections that her family had even beyond that period. And that, when you look at surprises in that, you see just these were strangers in a way, but actually to her were instrumental in who she was and how she ended up being where she is today.
Did she ever meet those people?
She didn't, not that we know of. She might have, but she wouldn't have known who they were in that sense.
That's quite amazing. I mean, just for somebody to be that philanthropic, to really save you completely in that matter is really just amazing. It's with the show. I mean, you saw people all across the country. I mean, just learning about people who were coming up whose families were slaves, or you're able to find out the information there. It's amazing that these documents exist, that we have all of this, that you can pare back all the way, hundreds of years. Are you working on new things in regards to the show, or what can you talk about with
right that? Well, so I would say that the show has been on hiatus for a couple of years now. There's no word of continued seasons. It's a lot of work and a lot of travel and a lot of research. Yeah. But I will say there's no shortage of stories. That there's no shortage of mysteries that people have, and across all different places in the United States.
Yeah. Tell us about your work, though, with the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society. Do you what does that organization do, and what do you do for them?
So our mission at the NYGNB, we were actually founded in 1869. And we've been around for a while, and our main mission is to preserve and record stories across New York State and in New York City. So I spend a lot of my time working with archives, working with different leaders in the community to try and make sure that if there's a record set that is in need of preservation, we can find the tools and the resources to preserve that and make that accessible for research. Mm-hmm. We also work directly with genealogists and family historians to help them interpret and use those materials. So it sort of goes both ways. We want to make sure they're available, but then also we want to make sure that they can use them and know how to conduct the research in some of those sources.
It's very important. Even here in my local community in Evanston, Illinois, there's a man who has started an organization called the Shorefront Legacy Center. And it was name's Dino Robinson. I don't know if you've ever met him, but he started this organization. It basically started with a couple of people. It was kind of just grassroots to collect the historical information about the Black community in the North Shore of Chicago, because no one was collecting this information, and it was like one side of a story. And what he's done and collected is very important to the entire community. I think you need to know your past in order to know your present and your future. So I think that's great what you're doing to be able to bring that in for New York. I mean, so many people have lived there and have come through there. I plan to come actually to New York in a couple of weeks, and want to go to Ellis Island. My family came through there, and I think it's important for my children to see that and the history.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I love all cities. New York has such an interesting place for so many people, particularly when you think of the immigration through Ellis Island and the stories there. And it's not only the records left behind; it's the physical buildings, and it's that experience. And I love whenever I travel and I meet people, and I always ask them, well, what's your New York story? and usually people will come back and say, well, I didn't think I had one, except my family came through Castle Garden or Ellis Island or something like that. So it's good to hear.
Yeah, we all have a connection there. Well, this is really just incredible, this film. And I mean, what is your key takeaway, would you say, from this movie?
I think the key thing is you never know really what you're going to find until you start looking. I mean, the premise of the boxes and the start of that search, and the worldwide connection that Dory found. You asked if it was unique, and To Dora, yes, but again, to everyone, not necessarily. Not if you start asking questions. We're all a lot more connected and have a bit more in common with one another than I think we really realize if we just ask, and then most importantly, if we listen.
Absolutely. And if people want to learn more about you and connect with you, how should they get in touch?
So the best way is actually through the New York GNB at newyorkfamilyhistory.org is our website, and you can get in touch with us there. And I'm accessible there via the site, and you're more than happy to reach out. And I'm always happy to answer questions and meet other people.
Well, this is fantastic. Joshua, we really appreciate your time talking with us about 7 Boxes and about genealogy. It's an important topic, and I think we really understand it. And thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you, Aaron. Thanks for asking great questions and for letting me be part of the event. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.